afternoon. My name is Georgian Scutaru. I'm the CEO of the New Strategy Center, the leading Romanian think tank in defense and security. And thank you very much for your interest to our panel dedicated to the strategic importance of the Black Sea region in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Before to start, I want to express my deeply gratitude to Mr. Simeon Tsomokos, the president of the Delphi Forum, and his team for their great work to organize every year this important event. We have 4 excellent speakers with whom we will debate these aspects of the strategic relevance of the Black Sea region. Dr. Antonia Colibasanu, a very excellent geopolitical analyst, professor, senior associate expert at New Strategy Center, and Chief Operating Officer, Geopolitical Future USA. Ambassador Lazăr Comănescu, Secretary General of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania. Major General Vakhtang Kapanadze, former Chief of Defense Staff of Georgia, and an excellent expert on how Russia operates in the military domain. And Dr. Greg Mills, Director of the Brenthurst Foundation, South Africa, an excellent expert on African economy and African social and political environment. Welcome to all of you. And we will start the dialogue with General Vakhtang Kapanadze. The Black Sea is a platform for the projections of Russian Federation interest in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East and North Africa. Black Sea is the region where all of Europe's frozen conflicts are located, from Transnistrian Republic of Moldova to Abkhazia and South Ossetia and Georgia, Nagorno-Karabakh and Caucasus. It's in the region where Russia has acted kinetically, attacking Georgia in 2008, annexing Crimea in 2014, and attacking again Ukraine in 2022. And if in Ukraine you have a full-scale kinetic warfare, in Georgia and Republic of Moldova we have a full-scale hybrid warfare conducted by Russia to destabilize these 2 countries. General, I would like to ask you, what is the strategic importance for Russia of the Black Sea region? And because we are in Delphi, what do you think about the possible evolutions of the war in Ukraine? What kind of prediction could you have?
Thank you very much.
You,
very interesting question, and considering the time frame, I will try to be very brief. Starting with Russia. Russia has always been interested in dominating on the Black Sea, and this is a historical characteristic of its foreign policy. This interest starts with Ivan the Terrible and Ekaterina the Great, and this is still today also. From Russian perspective, the Black Sea is a springboard for the projection of power and influence in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Africa, and South Europe. The Black Sea gives access to key regions where there are important security challenges like Syria, Iraq, Libya, and significant energy resources from the Middle East, the Caspian Sea, and North Africa also. For Russia, the Black Sea is an entry point into the warm waters of Mediterranean and a buffer between NATO and itself. It also serves as secure Russia's economic gateway to major markets in Southern Europe. But we should realize that it's different with Baltic Sea, which is already became its NATO's lake. Russia had already shifted the security balance in the Black Sea in its favor by annexing Abkhazia, as you mentioned, in 1992, Crimea 2014, and taking control of Sea of Azov in 2022. About Ukraine, just starting his gamble, Mr. Putin, which was labeled as a special military operation, Putin has announced 3 main end states for this operation. It was Nazification, demilitarization, and keeping NATO far from Russia's border. What Russia received today? After almost 2 years of bloodshed, he has received. Ukrainians finally cut historical, cultural, political, even ethnical ties with Russians. Ukrainian forces became the most experienced power with modern military combat systems, and finally, more 2,000 kilometers border with NATO. This gamble is absolutely failure for Russia, I mean strategical level. But on the operational level, at the military from military point of view, we are witnesses of, as experts call, second generation warfare kind of clashes, which it seems like First World War kind of war, with kilometers of trenches, domination of artillery, mass casualties, stormtroopers tactics, and area defense. The war has, but also it's very important that we should remember that, the war has taken character of war of attrition. And war of attrition has its own rule. And the main pillar of this is that not important how much territory you gain or liberate or occupied. Not important how many casualties you can insult it to the opposite side. The most important is what resources these opponents have left. And it means that from my understanding, unfortunately, I believe that this for sure war will last more than this year.
Thank you, General. We'll continue, and maybe my deeply belief is that, and I hope that next year at the Delphi Economic Forum we'll celebrate together the Ukraine victory, and it's necessary to continue to support in Ukraine because it's not. This is not fight of Ukraine. It's a fight of democracy against autocracy. Ambassador Comănescu, you are the Secretary General of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, an organization where Russia and Ukraine are members. How you characterize the current level of cooperation between the countries of the Black Sea area, taking into account all this difficult picture of Russia's aggressions against Ukraine?
Well, I have to say that to answer to this question, we may need much longer time than we have available. But let me just make some very brief remarks. But before that, I'd like to resume what I have said in the morning in another panel. I very much appreciate and welcome the fact, and grateful at the same time to the Delphi Economic Forum for having dedicated two special panels to the Black Sea area. And if I add other panels where the Black Sea has been touched upon, that means that there is, and I'm happy to see that there is a high awareness about the importance of this part of the world. Well, I may ask at the same time whether we would have needed to wait until a conflict is breaking down in this region to realize how important that region is. I'm saying that because I think that the basic idea from which the founders of this organization started is exactly the awareness about the importance of this region. And this is something which I wanted very much to stress. Second, I fully understand that in the current circumstances and because of the war, very unhappy developments, that means the war in Ukraine, when talking about security in the Black Sea area, the focus is concentrated mainly, if not exclusively, almost to the hard security dimension. And I'm now coming to your question. I think that we have to take into account that there is a very important economic dimension of security. And again, coming to your question, I look at that from two angles, looking into the situation as of now. On one hand, the economic cooperation in this region has been, and the activity of the organization, which I represent, has been seriously affected by this crisis, in the sense that practically after 24th of February last year, our activity was more or less put on hold. Happily, in between, things have evolved in such a way that the awareness of the merits of resuming the activity of the organization has been increased, and we are almost to the, let's say, the full activity. This is one point. A second point, the second angle which I'm looking from, is about the economic cooperation as an instrument of strengthening the security. And from this perspective on, I think that in spite of the difficulties as we have today, we have to look with some, let's say, realistic optimism. In what sense? You're asking me about how the organization is functioning. I said that it was almost put on hold. Now, we are back to our normal meetings, almost. We are back to meetings in person, and very important, the fact itself, even if it is just only perhaps symbolic, but symbolism sometimes is very important. We are now in the situation where around the same table, all the 13 member states are present. And we are talking about issues in spite of the difficulties, the very heavy atmosphere. We are now talking, for example, about updating the economic agenda of for the BISEC area for the next 10 years. And this is something which allows me to think that we should continue to work on that. So I would stop here. Perhaps later on we may elaborate. Well, of course, thinking about the way ahead. There, I think that we, in economic terms, I think that we now have to look into what areas where we could make further steps. And there are some of them. There are some of them, even if they're small projects, maybe, let's say, stay online. But in terms of, for example, environment, with small projects dedicated to cleaning the Black Sea, cleaning from the litter, this is something which we've been doing and continue to do as of today. I can continue with other concrete examples, but I will stop here not to, because time is limited, and I think that my colleagues in the panel, they have to elaborate.
Indeed, Ambassador, thank you very much. You mentioned the importance of economy, and now I come to Antonia, to Dr. Antonia Colibasanu. The Black Sea, it's a place where the important energy routes intersect. And also, Romania has important energy reserves, estimated more 200 billion cubic meters. Turkey also has discovered important energy resources. From your point of view, this battle for the Black Sea, how is count for energy domain?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I'm grateful for your comments, Ambassador, because you kind of shared a light of optimism with us, considering that your organization is still discussing about the next 10 years. I am particularly optimistic because that means that Russia may consider to allow us, Romania and Turkey, to develop our energy resources, considering what George asked. However, because I have the geopolitical angle, I have to take on the realistic route as well, even if I am more optimistic at the moment. Because indeed, steps are being made to discussion, so this is important. With regards to the energy resources, so what we know so far is that Romania at least intends to develop its project, which is pretty much in the very same area that is very important for the trade routes as well, and in an area that has been, I think, in the Russian eye, even without us wanting to develop those resources. And I say that considering the last decade, if you will, of Russian activity in the Black Sea, including increased harassments after they have de facto taken Crimea. That means that we have to think about a potential, disagreement, if to put it this way, in between Romania and Russia becoming more aggressive, even if we win the war in Ukraine, as I believe we will. What I want to point out is that those reserves are enough to basically supply energy to southeastern Europe, which is a traditional market for Russia. And only economic focus being taken, that means that Russia is not happy to allow us to basically become a competitor on the market. That said, because we are talking about Turkey as well, I believe that in the Black Sea and in the Black Sea competition, we are going to see formats of cooperation with regards to energy reserves and formats of competition when it comes to transiting. And that is important when we are talking about Russia-Turkish relationship, which is very complex, especially nowadays, and which gets me back to the trade routes and to the focus of that particular area that we are talking about in between the Danube mouth and the port of Odessa, where we know very well that there is a very small island that we have written a report on, very famous in the very first days of the war, called the Snake Island. And while no one believed that island would be very important, well, there we go. We are thinking again about its importance and its strategic meaning to Russia, to the West, and particularly to Ukraine and to the Ukrainian stability in the years to come. But furthermore, I rest my case here on energy resources. It's more complex than you probably have wanted me to comment on, but it is what it is these days. So,
thank you very much, Dr. Colibasanu. General Kapanadze mentioned this risk of an attrition war. And Greg, I come to you, and what will be the impact of a war of attrition in Ukraine for the food security of African countries? For instance, the Egypt's stability depends on Ukrainian, Russian, on Romanian grain. Please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I've attended one other Delphi forum last year, and there I met Katerina Yushchenko, the better half of the former president, and I've been now to Ukraine 6 times as a consequence of that, including one trip to Odessa to highlight the very costs of what you've just asked me. I think the easiest way to explain this is 2 ways. One is through an old African proverb which says that when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And we are the grass that is getting trampled as a consequence of this war. And let me secondly highlight 6 brief statistics which explain this point. The first of these is the figure 460 million. That figure is the number of Africans today living in conditions of poverty. It is about 1/3 of the African total of 1.4 billion. Anna Diamantopoulou, in an earlier session in this room, said that the children of today are from Europe, I'm paraphrasing her, but the children of tomorrow are from Africa. And that highlights my second statistic, which is 2.5 billion. That's the number of Africans that will be living on the continent at current rates of growth by the year 2050. In other words, within a single generation. So this issue it's going to get worse before it gets better. The third statistic is 42%. Now, that's not what I got for maths. It probably is what I got for maths at school. But 42% is the average amount of African household expenditure spent on putting food on the table every day. The average expenditure in the European Union is 15% of average income per day. The average expenditure in the United States is 6%. In other words, food costs matter a great deal more to Africa than they do to any other region. The fourth statistic is 100 million. 100 million is the shortfall in African cereal imports every year. Now, this is because 60% of African agricultural land, which is the greatest store of agricultural land in the world, 450 million hectares, is uncultivated. But so we demand the importation of this 100 million tons a year, or about $75 billion worth of cereal imports. And about 1/3 of this amount was sourced from Russia and from Ukraine before the invasion, including, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, some very important countries, Egypt, and in fact, right across North Africa, Egypt and Ethiopia among them. The fifth statistic is 2 million, and that is the fertilizer shortfall as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. Now, it's not just a food crisis, it's a food, fuel, and fertilizer crisis. And each of those have impacted very negatively on African food security and on African food needs because of the cost of moving that food into the continent. And then finally, and I think very importantly, and this will be a segue to perhaps future discussions in the time remaining, is 76%. Now, that's not what I got either at school, but 76% is the number of South Africans, as one measure, there are other measures, who condemn Russia for the war in Ukraine, according to the most recent opinion poll. And very interestingly, our government, of course, is officially neutral in this conflict, but has taken a very pro-Russian position in just about every other measure. So what that means is African populations are disproportionate casualties, victims of this war. African governments have taken either a neutral position. In fact, the vast majority of African governments have been pro-Ukraine, but some very important African governments, including among them Ethiopia, one of the disproportionate victims of this war, have taken a position that is at least ambivalent or neutral in this conflict. So yes, in answer to your question, we are affected very consequentially by the war in Ukraine, but no, we don't really have a position, a way out of it, beyond just simply appealing for more aid and playing the victim card.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mills. We've seen the huge impact on Russia's aggression in Ukraine, on African states. Dr. Colibasanu, mines representing the highest threat at the moment for the freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. How does this specific danger, but also the war in general, influence insurance and transport costs for the maritime trade?
Okay, well, considering what my fellow panelist Greg has said about the costs and the increase in the cost of food, the Black Sea is currently a war zone. And that basically means that not only that shipping is difficult, and part of the Black Sea is not very safe for transportation in general, to put it lightly, we have also increased insurance costs. We have also discussions related to the potential of further sanctions, making it very difficult for the shipping industry and the insurance industry in general continuing to function in this area of the world without getting super expensive. That basically means that right now, as we are also watching how the grain deal is being negotiated, we are in a position where we need to consider corridors, and we need to consider infrastructure, and we need to consider what is available, because obviously you cannot build infrastructure overnight. Of course, we have plans to increase our infrastructure capabilities, and of course that will be done, but for now, we are in a situation where cooperation, especially between those countries that are on the western side of the Black Sea and the southern side of the Black Sea, pointing exactly to what you were saying, is very much necessary, because we are going to see an increased flow of traffic inland. We are going to see even an outgrowth of traffic in the port of Constanța, which is already busy because it has not only taken what is coming from Ukraine into the port through the Danube, but it has also taken, along with Georgian ports, a lot of trade traffic coming through the middle corridor from China. So that means that we are going to be very busy in the neighborhood, especially if the grain deal is not going to be agreed on for another month or 3 months or 6 months further. And considering that, I believe that the most affected countries are going to be those that are poor, those that are in Africa. However, we are going to be very much affected in Europe as well, because as you have seen, the matter of the grain being dumped and the grain flooding the market, whatever you want to call, in the countries on the frontier, basically points to another very important problem that we are going to have to deal with, which regards our own protection while we are also needing to help Ukraine further. So we are going to basically have to set a balance, and we are also having to build up capabilities very fast to set up that balance and the very physical elements that we need to deal with in regards to transit, because obviously we will need to accommodate, and I think this is not negotiable, we will need to accommodate Ukrainian transit, not only because we have the war that Russia started against the West. It's not a war against Ukraine only, it is a war against us, and we need to find ways to build ourselves and build capabilities for our own sake, but also because we have the responsibility towards those poor countries in Africa to also explain them what we are doing for them in Europe as we are working for them. I think this is going to be very key element, if I can use very in front of key, to basically win the global economic war that Russia has started when it blockaded the ports of Ukraine. So it's a very important and very challenging question, and I'm sorry if I took too much of the time. So I'll shut up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Colibasanu. Ambassador Comănescu, what economic cooperation projects can be implemented without Russian participation?
Well, before trying to answer to your question, I'd like to say that I'm most grateful to Antonia and to Greg Mills for their comments, which make me being even more upbeat in terms of stressing the importance of the economic dimension of the security. I think that I feel a bit, as I said. That's one comment which I wanted to make. Doesn't mean that we do not be aware, we are not aware about the hard dimension of security. That's for clear, especially under the current circumstances. Now, coming to to your question, George. As I said, I would first say that once again that the fact that even in the current circumstances, we managed to come back to this, to sit around the same table. I mean, the representatives of the 13 member states, it's something which I think that deserves to be, let's say, to be valued as an asset, in a way. Point number one. Point number two, reference was made here to the grain deal. That brings me to, to highlight how important it is that even in the most difficult and adversarial relationships, efforts deserve to be made to keep, even if it is as narrow as possible, doors or channels for dialogue. If, or negotiations, I wonder whether the grain agreement would have been reached at without efforts towards keeping this type of let's say, channels. And now, there are areas where there have been, and there are also still continue to be projects. You know, being in the Black Sea Economic Organization doesn't mean that in any project, everybody should be there. And there are projects, like for example, the so-called permit system, which is without Russia, and is going on. There are projects in the area of the environment, which are similar. So in energy, it's not a contribution by the BISEC, but nevertheless, the fact that the electric cable crossing the Black Sea between Azerbaijan, Georgia, Romania, and Hungary, so it shows that there are possibilities, opportunities in this area as well. Here, and with this I will conclude. I feel the need to stress that, you know, as far as the BISEC area is concerned, there are several actors, not only individual states, but also in international organizations, regional or not only regional, which have an eye on the BISEC, or on the Black Sea area. You have the European Union with the Black Sea Synergy and Danube Strategy. You have the 3SI, 3 Seas Initiative. You have the CCP, South Europe Cooperation Process. And even you have also the CI, the Central European Initiatives. All of these organizations, they keep an eye on the Danube. But in a way, each one of them separately. Then there is a need of coming to some substantive synergies in order to be able to promote projects, including those where not necessarily all the member states of the BISEC need to participate. Okay. I will conclude with this.
Thank you, Ambassador. We discussed a lot about the freedom of navigation, and Vakhtang, I want to ask you, what more should NATO do for freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, taking into account the specificity of the Montreux Convention? It is necessary to have more ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities to compensate the lack of naval capabilities of Romania or Bulgaria, for instance.
Yes, first of all, I think it's NATO need
in 2 minutes, because I have a question also to Greg.
Systemized strategy and proactive plan for wider Black Sea region. Technically speaking, it's of course I agree with you, and very important increasing and improve exchange of intelligence information and share common operation picture between Black Sea allies. Also will be very important the deployment of advanced anti-missile and coastal defense systems in Romania and Bulgaria to counter Russian offensive missile threats. Also important extend NATO exercises. Continue Western assistance to Ukraine and Georgia for the development of their national defense capabilities. Also, I think it's very important ad hoc bilateral partnership on mutual priorities represent another possible path to advance regional cooperation. And finally, I'd like to present Mr. Stoltenberg's statement that more NATO in Black Sea region and more Black Sea region in NATO.
Indeed, you are right. The last questions to Greg. What expectations there are in the South Africa regarding Putin's participation in the BRICS summit this summer?
That's a have you stopped beating your wife question yet. I think it depends on who you speak to. I think if you speak to the South African government, they will tell you that you know, this is part of the BRICS and this is part of the changing global economic order. But if you speak to most civil society activists in South Africa, they would say it's an extremely bad idea. And I do think that one of the problems we have in Africa is we don't see ourselves as really participants in this conflict. We're not masters of our own destiny. We are bystanders, spectators. And when you mention something like the Black Sea or food initiatives, we should be taking a far more active role in coming up with a plan which steers a middle course, which is in Africa's best interest. But we don't. We either genuflect towards Russia, which is about 22 countries at last count in the UN, or we tend to simply stay on the fence and stay out of it as best as possible. So on the BRICS, we are very partial, but most South Africans are also partial, but in the opposite way.
Thank you very much. We are here at Delphi Economic Forum, and to conclude, ever since the first Greek colonies were established on the shore of the Black Sea in ancient time, this region has been open to trade and should remain open to trade. I hope we'll give you more information about the relevance of the Black Sea region and the context of Russian aggression in Ukraine. Thank you very much, and see you next year in Delphi Economic Forum to celebrate Ukraine victory. All the best to all of you.